Hello, this is Daniel Lawrence Smith, Associate Director of Training at Out and Equal Workplace Advocates. I'd like to welcome each of you to our September monthly town call on bi awareness, what companies need to know. This is a broadcast audio call, so you should be hearing audio directly from your computer. And this meeting will be available offline as a recording afterward, and we will also make the slide decks available. A few announcements here at Out and Equal. On October 5th, we will have the Leadership Day of our Out and Equal Workplace Summit in Dallas, Texas. This is a day of intensive training on issues for global equality, creating employee resource groups or business resource groups, advanced ERG, BRGs, our Out and Equal Train the Trainer series, establishing intersections among people of faith and LGBTAs in the workplace, allies in the workplace, and unconscious bias. And of course that leads into our Out and Equal Workplace Summit in Dallas, Texas. It will be our 17th summit. Join 2,500 other professionals around issues of diversity and inclusion and LGBT workplace equality. It should be a great event. October 29th will be our monthly town call where we'll report out on our Workplace Summit highlights. And on November 19th, our town call will cover our workplace gender identity and transition guidelines, which will be transition guidelines published by Out and Equal along with our Transgender Advisory Committee. And if you haven't done so already, join us on our Out and Equal Communities platform, a great way to connect with our regional affiliates, our advisory committees. And with that said, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panel of wonderful hosts today. And Lauren, I'll give you an opportunity to go ahead and say a few words about yourself.
Hi, thank you so much. I appreciate being on this call today. My name is Lauren Beach, and I am a postdoctoral research fellow at Vanderbilt University Medical Center. In addition to having backgrounds both in genetics and law, I have been a longtime community activist with several different bisexual groups, a member of the bisexual group here at Out and Equal, and I'm a coordinator of Bisexual Leadership Roundtable, member of Bylaw. Also, there's a new health researchers group that I'm a part of, and I'm really pleased to be here today, so thank you.
Thank you so much, Lauren. And next we have Gary North.
Hi, everyone. You can see that I'm a co-founder of BiNet USA and a founder of National Bi Newsletter. And I'm involved in a lot of other things, both in and outside of that community, and I'm glad to be with you all today.
Thank you, Gary. And next is Denise Penn.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Denise Penn, and I am a social worker and a journalist. I spent many years documenting LGBT issues for the community. And I'm a past president of BiNet USA. I'm currently with the American Institute of Bisexuality, and I'm the co-chair of the LGBT caucus of the California State Democratic Party. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you so much for all of you for participating today. And that's who we are, and now we'd like to know who you are. So we have some interactive polls. So our first question for you is, what community identity label do you use for your sexual orientation? Bisexual, lesbian, asexual, gay, or straight? So go ahead and put in your answer, and then we'll be able to see these results in real time. Okay, we have about 2/3 of us answering. Great. And we're really seeing a diversity, bisexual, lesbian, gay, and straight, but we're not seeing any asexual on the call. But thank you, everybody, for putting in your responses. And we have another question now. So for those of you who answered bisexual in the last poll, what personal identity label do you use for your sexual orientation within bisexual? Pansexual, fluid, bisexual, queer, homosexual, polysexual, sapiosexual, omnisexual, many gender loving, or heteroflexible or homoflexible. So go ahead and put in your results there if you specifically answered under bisexual for the last question. Okay, and we're seeing this range as well. we're seeing much more, 73% as bisexual, but we're also seeing fluid, pansexual, polysexual, and many gender loving. So thank you for your answers and your feedback there. Really appreciate it. Now, when we talk about who we are in the workplace, our next question is, what is your role within your company? Are you an executive, employee resource group or business resource group member, a human resource or D&I professional, LGBT or allied employee, other, and if it is other, feel free to go ahead and chat in your answers, not applicable or prefer not to answer? Okay, and again, we're seeing a good range here, so a lot of ERG members, but what we're seeing is about 40% who are LGBT or allied employees. So also sort of tied with the ERG members, but we're also seeing executives, we're seeing others, we're seeing an administrative assistant just chatted in. Thank you so much. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn the presentation over to Lauren Beach. Lauren?
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure to cover more of a Bisexuality 101 background with the focus on having some context in the workplace. So to get us started, I wanted to present a summary of different facets of identity that intersect when it comes to thinking about sexual orientation. So if you remember growing up, for maybe a lot of us on this call, at least for me, when I was taught, maybe from a more essentialist model, that if you knew somebody's sex, that you automatically knew their gender, and you would assume a sexual orientation of straight, and that maybe as I got a little bit older, thinking about relationships, romantic relationships, in particular sexual relationships, that people would be identified as monogamous, and men would seek to grow up to marry women, and women marry men, etc. But since then, as someone who's now a researcher of sexual orientation, gender identity, sex, a lot of different facets of this, have come to learn that sex, gender identity, so sex, gender, and sexual orientation rather, are all spectrums, and that people have a variety of identities, and they may identify as being on a spectrum or having an identity that falls outside of it. So that's reflected in this slide. So I'm talking about sex. I'm talking about biological sex, so we're thinking about people who identify as male, female, or intersex. When I'm thinking about gender, I'm thinking of gender identity expression. I'm thinking of it as being more cultural in nature. So people may identify as male, female, masculine, feminine, may identify as transgender, gender nonconforming, genderqueer in various ways. Thinking about sexual orientation, people may identify as straight, bisexual, gay, or lesbian. They may be unlabeled or use a variety of other personal labels outside of more prevalent community identities that I think we think about when we talk about the LGBT community. And then also I think about relationship orientation. So people may identify as monogamous, non-monogamous, fluid, or have other types of relationship orientation. And then also, although it's not on the slide, sexual orientation can include a focus not just on the gender or sex of our partners, but thinking more about whether somebody identifies as asexual, demisexual, or as having, I guess, a sexual identity in different ways. So there's degrees of that as well. So that's just a rough background of those topics. So something I just alluded to is that, and that we actually saw very powerfully in our polling results, is that although many people identify with the community label of bisexuality, the bisexual community can be seen as an umbrella term. So that's shown very nicely in this graphic here, developed by Sherry Eisner. And so we saw that in our responses, many people identify personally as using the term bisexual. Some people use fluid, many gender or same gender loving, queer, bicurious, pansexual, meaning they're polysexual. There are many different labels that we see. And when we're talking about bisexual inclusion in the workplace, we really do mean this umbrella. So in terms of thinking more about bisexuality as a sexual orientation itself can be broken down further into components of identity, attraction, and behavior. And it's also both, as we already chatted about, a community identity and an individual identity. So you can check out some different blog posts or writings about that that are referenced here. Specifically, my friend Patrick Richard Fink, who is a board member of BINET USA, I think has done a lot of this work very well. So what do we know about bisexuality? Well, there's a lot of data coming out about sexual orientation and gender and how they relate to health as well as economic empowerment. So first of all, though, before we even get to that, there are many people within the self-identified LGBT community who identify as bisexual. So here, this is a report from the Williams Institute showing that lots of people in the LGBT community and T community identify as bisexual. So it's roughly half of the self-identity of the LGBT community identifies as bisexual, and many people within the transgender community also identify as bisexual. So that is shown here is transgender identity, but there is emerging work that shows many trans people also identify as bisexual or using other personal identity labels out there under our umbrella. So the Williams Institute has also done some great work looking at poverty rates. And so you can see here that bisexual men and women experience higher rates of poverty than people who are heterosexual or gay, lesbian identified. Importantly, there also has been a lot of great work showing that many transgender people, many of whom identify as bisexual, are also living in poverty, and those rates are actually higher than LGBT. So in thinking about economic empowerment and how that may or may not, how that relates to employment, it's something to keep in mind overall about the demographics of the community. So why might we see disparities? I would say that biphobia, or the negative attitude, bias, fear, discrimination against bisexual people plays a large role in that. And so then I would ask, I guess we don't have a poll question here, but it might be worth talking about when we reach more of the discussion section of our talk about ways people have seen biphobia playing out in the workplace that might contribute potentially to why we see higher rates of poverty, lower levels of income as well for bisexual folks in terms of the context of this call. So in terms of biphobia, it also influences the challenges that many people face in the workplace. So I have 4 challenges summarized here. They include invisibility, the use of non-inclusive language, what I call the double closet, and of course environmental factors. So in terms of bisexual invisibility, here we have a graphic showing what it might feel like to be passed over as a bisexual person. So often bisexual people, based on the gender of the relationship partner, will be perceived as gay or straight, and they blend in rather than being seen for who they are as bisexual people. So there are lots of pernicious stereotypes too. Many people will think and say that bisexuality doesn't exist, and I think again that plays into the idea that we're a race, that bisexuality is the only sexual orientation that doesn't also double as a relationship orientation in our everyday language. So for example, if I say I'm a bisexual person, I'm in a bisexual relationship, people would say, I get the bisexual person comment, I'm not so sure what you mean by a bisexual relationship. Either you're in a gay relationship or a straight relationship. So that, I think, contributes, just our language alone contributes to invisibility. There's this idea that it's really fallen out of favor, but that historically LGBT people were seen as having mental disorders. There still is this interesting caveat, or a factor of transgender identity disorder being seen as a disorder in the DSM. I think that we could again touch on some of these points and questions, because there does get some complexity here. And also in terms of invisibility, people will often see bisexuality as a phase rather than a permanent identity. And so again, even if people will say bisexuality is a real label or a real community, they'll say, but it's totally transitory. Bi now, gay later, for example. So in terms of language, a lot of people in the community think that labels might put them in boxes that they don't like, which can make it a little bit tricky to think about how do we organize or reach out to our population. But even we found from doing some needs assessments and community work that was done in coordination with both Bisexual Organizing Project and some folks that replicated that in their area in California with the LA Bi Task Force, that people will see the community label and will often come to spaces where they see the word, even if they don't personally identify using labels related to what we would think of as bisexual individual terms. So in terms of what I meant by the double closet, so many people who are bisexual identified with a different label first. So again, work from Bisexual Organizing Project has found that 1/3 of people, like myself, have always identified as bisexual, that there are 1/3 of people identified as gay or lesbian first and then later identified as bisexual, and that many people also may have identified as straight first before coming to the term bisexual. And so these results and I think personal stories of many people out there show the fluidity of sexual orientation as it relates to labeling and personal identities. So I think that pushes back again on this stereotype that contributes to invisibility of bi now, gay later. We see that this is a multi-directional process that may mean our coming out experiences look different than other people in the self-identified LGBT communities. So, and lastly, I want to talk about infrastructure, because a lot of these topics, they're more interpersonal, or we're thinking about social norms and structures, and that we need to think on the institutional level as well. And so we think about our physical spaces where we're working, we think about social norms contributing to the development of corporate structures, and we also think about healthcare benefits. And in particular, although the Affordable Care Act has mandated parity between physical and mental health care, we know that many people, in terms of the healthcare infrastructure, they experience longer waiting times to get access to mental health care. And I think as Denise Penn and Gary North are going to show, mental health concerns are something that really deeply impact the bisexual community in ways that there's deeper disparities for us than there are for even oftentimes gay and lesbian folks. So I would say thinking about ensuring your mental health care benefits are accessible could be having a really great impact on bisexual employees in the workplace. So in terms of helping them be more productive at work. So what's the impact of discrimination? I feel like I don't need to necessarily tell this group. I think many people out there have experienced maybe not being able to bring their whole selves to work in various ways, and that can be very distracting, especially if you're worried about what's the impact going to be of people finding out about your identity in terms of how can I go about navigating my workday and rather than thinking about doing your work. And of course, health disparities. We know that many communities out there, not just sexual minority and gender minority communities, but other groups too, which experience social stigma and prejudice, have deeper health disparities. So that, I would say, discrimination directly leads into poor health outcomes. And then talking about poverty earlier, discrimination also can lead to unemployment or being passed over for better employment opportunities. So here I have a few examples of what discrimination might look like, both within the LGBT community and with straight communities. So sometimes even within LGBT-specific spaces, bisexual people are told, we don't want your kind here, you're not part of us. Therapists may not, even though mental health is important in terms of access for a community, not all therapists or mental health professionals may be competent to serve bisexual people. Bisexual people, even by therapists, may be pushed on their bisexual identities in ways that may contribute to increased stress. And also I would challenge people here that not to consider bisexual people as confused. So if you see someone who identifies as bisexual or you've seen different patterns in their relationship history, it doesn't mean that they aren't ready for a promotion or that they're confused. They're still, maybe they're just a bisexual person and that they are competent and ready to go to work in excellent ways. And so I would push back against those types of assumptions when looking at performance reviews. So with that, I will turn it over to the fabulous Denise Penn.
Thank you, Lauren. And I am going to start out with a poll. Okay, which of these celebrities identify as bisexual? Go ahead and put your answers in. Okay, I think everybody's recorded their answer, and yes, it is all of the above. And one of the reasons, there's an assumption that in Hollywood it's easier to be out and be bisexual, but that's not actually true. Some celebrities are told by their managers that that's going to limit their opportunities for roles, and so we're really happy about the celebrities who have had the courage to come out. And here's another polling question. Does your company's literature include the B in outreach for recruiting and marketing? And it looks like we have some great companies that do and some that don't. And it looks like a lot of us are just not really sure what they're doing. And, you know, so this is a good opportunity to kind of look at the company and see what's going on. I'm going to go through some slides about some other issues, and then later on in this webinar, Gary North and I will talk about some specific mental health issues. As ERG members and leaders, you have the power to change that dynamic. Many ERGs are perplexed about how to include bisexual people or aren't even aware that they do have bisexual people. Many times bisexuals are mistaken for allies. Many people do join ERGs and don't come out. They just want to be close and part of the ERG, but they don't actually come out as being bisexual for fear of discrimination in the workplace. Bisexuals and biclueless ERGs are most often closeted to feel safe, and many ERGs are kind of clueless and don't know that much about bisexuality. A bi-aware ERG encourages full participation by bisexuals and everyone else too. So if you're part of an ERG or if your company has an ERG, it's a good idea to present some material that is very bi-affirming and welcoming. When you become a champion of bi-awareness, you explode the footprint and the impact of your ERG. It just really opens it up so that everyone feels welcome and included. Okay, what does bi-awareness look like, and how do we champion bi-awareness, and how will bi-awareness build my ERG? And the answer to these questions are pretty simple. Bi-awareness can be as simple as making sure that your literature, your flyers for the ERG meetings include the word bisexual, and bi films and material can be presented as educational materials at ERG meetings. Our ERG members appreciate what bisexuality is and who bisexuals are. Something as simple as this can help tremendously. I'm not confused. I'm not going through a phase. I'm not experimenting. I'm not half gay and half straight. I'm not greedy. I'm not lying. I do not need to make up my mind. I'm not just trying to be cool. I am certain. I'm not saying everyone is, but I am bisexual. Something like that is really, really simple and addresses a lot of the myths and stereotypes that people believe about bisexuals. Okay, and then the question of dating. A bisexual person in the workplace is not as comfortable putting the picture of the person that they're in a relationship with on their desk or bringing someone to a work-related event, because when they're dating someone, there's an assumption that they're either gay or straight. Honoring events like Celebrate Bisexuality Day and Bi-Awareness Week that we're in right now will really, really help. Special events can be had by the ERG that will indicate that they're very inclusive in celebrating bisexuality. This is a little bit of background about Celebrate Bisexuality Day, September 23rd every year, first observed in 1999 on September 23rd, which is the date of the fall equinox. By Pride Day, by Visibility Day, these are all words that it's referred to as. And on September 23rd in 2013, the White House hosted a first bifocus meeting, and they just held another one on the 21st of September, just this past Monday, and Lauren Beach and I were there. Okay, and here's some detail about, there are books that are available that are helpful for people who are looking for bi material, and this can help a lot to recommend these books to people who are struggling with it. How do I champion bi-awareness? Host bi-focus events and have everyone come, not just the bisexuals, and fly the bi flag wherever you fly the rainbow flag. And, of course, the bi flag is that one in the middle with the pink and the purple and the blue. Make sure bisexuals are visible in leadership roles. And this photograph is from the 2013 Bisexual Roundtable meeting in Washington, D.C. Never leave the B out and push back when others do. Insist that the word bisexual be added when there is a lesbian and gay, or even some ERGs, some organizations are using LGBT and not including the B. How can I build my ERG through bi-awareness? Getting Beyond the Sex and Bisexuality, a seminar on bisexual inclusion and turning allies into advocates. This is something that was held last year and was very, very successful. Attend the community engagement series. And these kind of panel discussions, you can sponsor one for your ERG in your company, and this is really helpful. Stay informed on what's happening in bi communities. There are lots of reports that are coming out, and as the slide says, there's the Bi Youth Report from HRC. The Movement Advancement Project has also released a guidebook. The Bi Resource Center is doing a lot of work with Bi Health. The Bi Organizing Project, based in Minneapolis, does a lot of great work. Bisexual Research Collaborative on Health, Birch, is a new organization formed last year in 2014 by Fenway Health and the BRC. And the new book, Recognize the Voices of Bisexual Men, was released, and this is really important. It's an anthology of stories that were written by bisexual men, and as many of you may have observed, there are some special difficulties for bisexual men as opposed to women, and Gary will address that a little later. And these are some resources, and I'm not going to go over all of those, but these are some websites you can go to for information. And now I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Gary, and then Gary and I will present some material at the end of the webinar about some special mental health issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Denise, and hello again. I was initially asked to speak on these issues from a male perspective. I'm always hesitant to do so increasingly now because of the awareness that I think we all have regarding the issue of gender identity, and that the full awareness people have as to what constitutes male, what constitutes female, what constitutes transgender, and that sort of thing, has thrown the issue, in my mind, of male perspective into flux, at the very least. I never speak of myself or see my self or my awareness of the outside world from a quote-unquote male perspective. But of course I have my blind spots too. So when I think of, well, who am I? I'm aware that I had a husband who died of AIDS. I have a wife who was a former caregiver of his. I have 8 grandchildren because of her 3 grown children from a previous marriage, and I have 2 great-grandchildren. So I see myself as a grandfather. I see myself as a journalist. I see myself as a former union leader. I see myself as a current technical editor. I see myself in lots of terms, but not in terms of gender. By the same token, one of the things that people are increasingly talking about by erasure, and you'll see this crop up more and more, and that a number of bi activists are pushing back from people who outside of the bi community who want to define bi as merely male and female, or maybe 2, and that construct is, well, in many of our views, way not accurate. Bi is an old term, much like I equate it with the NAACP, which once upon a time started off as National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Of course, that's way antiquated. But it has a brand. It has an identity. People know what that organization is. So they've kept NAACP as their sort of their logo, if you want. By the same token, a lot of people understand vaguely what bi means. And so a lot of people have been challenging the idea that, well, bi only means 2, and it doesn't include transgender people and gender minority people and people who I self-identify as queer or some other term. This happens to be a quote from a bi activist who is stridently in favor of keeping the word bisexual. And here are some others. Because of the stereotypes and that sort of thing. Interestingly, some of these quotes are from males and some are from females and some are from transgendered people. And some of them, quite frankly, do identify as pan or fluid or some other term. I don't like labels at all. I've got 3 grandkids who increasingly are saying that they identify to some degree as bi, but they really, it's so post-label in their view. They've grown up with these ideas, and so the idea of labeling is sort of either anathema to them, or they don't identify, or they see it as not needed. In fact, here's one: the inclusive definition of bisexual isn't the update; it's old school. Now, this is being positive about use the word, but a lot of people don't like the word, and they see it as old school purposely. I'm not of the opinion that we should be wedded to that word, but it helps if it increases awareness. Even in my own company where I currently work, I don't push it. I'm tired of being a lightning rod. I want someone else to be the activist. But the fact is, it's a word. People understand it. They sort of understand it. It's good enough, in my opinion. And of course, Denise and Lauren will probably have other points of view. But we're all aware that this is a very energetic. There is an energetic debate as to what the terminology should be, and therefore, in the ERG, how do you use that word if no one agrees that, well, that's the right word to use? And of course, we went through that many years ago when gay became the lingua franca. Am I saying that right? I guess I am. And then lesbian as compared to homosexual or some other phrase. And so there's always going to be this debate. And of course, I always step back and say, we're only talking about the English language in the United States of America. We're not talking about another language. We're not talking about a different construct or the way that we perceive sexuality. So to some degree, it's a non-issue in my book, but that's just me, and I've internalized the debate. But trying to communicate in a business who you are and what you want to communicate to your workers and your employees, your potential employees when you go out recruiting, it's a sort of dicey, and that's why I tend to say bi/pan/fluid. I'm thinking, well, I've sort of covered the bases, but this is what some activists feel about this. So that's my presentation, and I'm not sure if I've clarified or made matters worse, but this is what I'm dealing with as the secretary of my local ERG here at where I work. And Denise, do you want to pick it up from there?
Thank you, Gary. That was great. And I just want to address some of the special mental health issues that bisexual people experience that are really, really affect them in the workplace. Start out by saying that bisexuals experience minority stress and social isolation as a result of their marginalized sexual identities, and they also experience high rates of psychological distress, anxiety, depression, suicidality, alcohol misuse, and self-harming behavior. And I think that there are more and more statistics out there about the disparities, mental health disparities, as well as health disparities that bisexuals experience, but it's very important to approach these with the understanding that disparities are not caused by inherent flaws within a bisexual person. They are caused by the social systems and the culture that create them. Bisexual people will face adverse events on many levels, and this affects their mental health on many levels. On the macro level, which is the social structure, they experience many, many disparities. On the meso level, that's interpersonal, and on the micro level, which is individual, because bisexuals have grown up within a culture that does not accept them, that renders them invisible, so that affects them too. Determinants of emotional well-being are identified, and monosexism and biphobia exert a broad-reaching impact on mental health. Bisexual people report greater childhood adversity, less positive support from family, and more negativity from friends than gay and lesbian individuals. And some of the statistics you'll see here about mood disorders by women have had more anger, self-injury, and suicidal ideation and attempts, and lifetime depression. And if you think about this, this is, again, not because bisexual people are inherently flawed or emotionally disturbed. It is because of living within a system that does not promote acceptance. So the bisexual in the workplace has to expend a lot of energy hiding their sexual orientation, being careful not to say anything on a personal phone call for fear that they will be discriminated against. And that does affect their ability to do a really, really top-notch, put 100% of their energy into doing their job. Substance abuse and PTSD by women have higher rates of alcohol use, heavy drinking, and alcohol-related problems. And again, that's due to the fact that because of the systemic issues, there are a few ways for bisexual women to cope. And so those kind of things are turned to as some kind of cure frequently. Research has not tended to look at bisexual men separately from gay men for this topic, and that's an issue too. Since the beginning of the HIV and AIDS epidemic, you will see a lot of information lumped together. It will say bi and gay men, bi and gay men. So it's been very difficult to pull out that information. And Gary, would you like to comment on that?
Just that I, for decades, literally decades, fought the idea that we should separate bi from gay people. I didn't see things in terms of gender. I just thought we're all one community, LGBT. And so I was quietly against separating things out. But that's because I saw the statistics as the CDC had collected them or other people had collected them, and it was all lumped together. And it wasn't until recently, as researchers did start to separate out the dynamics of the differences, that I had an aha moment and realized, wow, all this time I thought we were all in this together, both the good and the bad. And just the opposite is the case, as these statistics bear out. So, and of course, in the case of, I think, this is just a personal opinion, the stigma of being a bi male is very strong, as that new book points out, versus a bi female, which I think is maybe more acceptable in at least the American common culture, because it seems that it's more okay for a female actress to be bi than, say, a male actor. That they are seen as, well, they're really gay, and they just say they're bi, and there's still a strong negative reaction among many people that when they hear bi, or when they meet someone who's bi male, they have a visceral reaction. And I see this in my own workplace, although it's a great workplace. But the snide comments, the occasional, behind-the-scenes type thing that I happen to be privy to, and just a general awareness that it's still not quite accepted, especially among people above the age of 20 or 25, something like that. There seems to be a dichotomy. And so I think we have a long way to go as far as research in that regard.
Right. Thank you, Gary. And in my work as a social worker, I observed that bisexual men were frequently scapegoated early in the HIV and AIDS epidemic as those men who were sneaky and opportunistic and carried the virus from the gay community, from the gay male community, to their heterosexual female partners. And I think that stigma has carried over and is still being perpetuated. And here's some statistics about the risk of suicide or suicidal ideation. Again, not because there's anything wrong with bisexuals or because they're mentally ill or have any more tendency to be disturbed, but because there is a problem with our systems that they are not able to access help, whereas a person of a monosexual, a straight person, or a gay or lesbian person, it's easier for them to access help if they're feeling depressed. And here we have internalized biphobia. And although 40 to 50% of people, according to some studies, have attractions to more than one gender, only 1% of them report a bisexual identity. And again, we're all raised in this culture and in this system that people are not educated, people do not support the concept of being bisexual. So, in looking at cultural competency, and again, many therapists, when we look at the statistics about suicide, depression, many therapists are not educated. This is a quote from one licensed clinician. Bisexuality was never even mentioned in my master's level human sexuality class, nor in my undergrad human sexuality class. The Masters and Johnson spectrum was described as, quote, degrees of heterosexuality versus homosexuality. So when a bisexual person does need someone to talk to, many times they're met with misunderstanding, rejection, discrimination, and this disables bisexual people in the workplace as well as other places in their life.
I'd like to add something to that, Denise. And I blame myself as much as anybody with regard to this sort of dichotomy between the Kinsey one and the six. It behooves bi people and activists to speak up. And we can look back, hindsight being 20/20, and you have a licensed clinician here who is describing degrees of heterosexuality versus homosexuality as if, well, isn't there something in the middle that would have its own label? And of course other people think that, well, it's a whole different sexuality, separate and apart from a continuum or the historic Kinsey scale. So a number of researchers and others are looking to disenthrall ourselves from that old image. There was a fellow, Dr. Klein, who came up with the a Klein scale of sexuality, which was sort of a geometric grid that I think Lauren or Denise could speak on more, that sort of says, well, wait a minute, there's a lot more to sexuality than a straight single line. And the idea that people didn't think outside of that box or that line and didn't realize, well, maybe there's a greater dynamic or more dynamics going on than that is in itself sort of disappointing. But I'm hoping that as bi people speak up more, and this is where I blame myself, I didn't speak up the way I should have. And I didn't push it the way I should have, that there is a consciousness raising, to use an old-fashioned term, and that this will have a trickle-down effect in research and others, that they will look beyond the black and the white and look at all the, I was going to say the grays, but the rainbow of dynamics and what should be studied and quantified.
Exactly. And companies that provide, here under policy recommendations, just a couple of things. Companies that do provide diversity training on LGBT issues should definitely contain separate modules on bisexuality. Otherwise, we get the LGBT and the B is kind of lost. And also I wanted to mention improving the health of bisexual Americans delivering bi-specific interventions and treatment options, what companies can do is really make sure that with their employee assistance programs that maybe provide 8 to 10 visits with a therapist for work-related stress, make sure those therapists are people who are bi-sensitive and maybe publicize that too, so that the employees who are having problems, when they go to someone, they're going to have someone to talk to that understands their issues.
Okay, thank you all. With that, I think we should kick it over to our questions and answers. We do have a few questions that have come in. And the first one has to deal with different ways that biphobia can manifest itself in the workplace. And I'll sort of open that up to all if we want to talk about that.
I'll start briefly by just saying that I've run into it. The New York Times did an article, big article, on bisexuality within the past year or so. And of course, a lot of my colleagues saw my photo in the New York Times. And that's when the snide comments began. And I work with a good group of people. I also worked in a number of newspapers as a reporter and an editor. And I always thought of newspapers as enlightened, and found out that, yeah, they are, and a lot of the workers are, but a lot of the workers weren't. And so it's the snide comments, it's the wink, wink, nudge, nudge sort of thing among other colleagues that, I've gotten used to it. I've got thick skin, but yeah, it hurts, and sometimes it can have a chilling effect. I do know that intolerance is not tolerated. Where I currently work, we have a great group of people in HR, and so it's a good place to work. But I still need to stand up and be that lightning rod that I reluctantly end up being, because if I don't do it, no one else necessarily is going to do it, although the HR people and others do come to the fore and are more and more proactive.
So
Great.
Thank you for that answer. Yeah, this is Lauren Beach speaking, and I was one of the 3 co-authors of the bisexual policy briefs that were developed for our work in federal advocacy. And so in terms of our employment paper, we highlighted that oftentimes biphobia in the workplace looks like sexual harassment, specifically tied to sexual orientation. And so that might mean being asked specific questions about, have I had a threesome? Have I participated in various types of kinky sexual acts? Do I have sex with, what are the genders of my partners? People also may want to ask, kind of prove it questions to me. Well, when was the last time you had sex with a woman? When was the last time you had sex with a man? And so those are obviously inappropriate questions, but somehow when it's found out someone is bisexual, it becomes open. People think all of a sudden they can just say these things even in the workplace. So we've seen examples of that, and that's been proven by 2 different studies, both by Ann Tweedy and colleagues in 2012 that documented a lot of those types of experiences, and also by Heidi Bruins-Queen, who has done a lot of work with Out and Equal. A study that was preliminary published results of that came out in the Journal of Bisexuality in 2010, so there is some documentation of that. Also, I wanted to say that oftentimes there are increased rates of harassment based on bisexual identity in communities of color and in communities who are living with disabilities, that there are many different, the more that you have intersecting identities, the higher the rates of biphobia and harassment in the workplace and elsewhere. So those are some important points.
I see another question coming in, and this is a language sensitivity question. So it's asking, is it acceptable to use bisexual as a noun or only as an adjective, given the context of this person says that they hear the phrase bisexuals, but they never really hear the phrase, or it's not acceptable to say gays. You would instead say gay men or gay man. So is the term bisexuals as a noun acceptable?
Hi. Yes, I think I'm not offended by it. I think that we're happy to hear people use the term bisexual in any way.
Great.
Yeah, I think that it's. Oh, go ahead. I think it's fine to use it as a noun, but that when you use person-specific language, when you say bisexual people, I think the best practice of doing that is to emphasize the human, the personhood of bisexuals, which can so often be forgotten and erased, and that similar language is used to say things like people living with HIV or people with disabilities, as opposed to just using a more descriptive noun-based term.
Great, and we are coming right up on the hour, so if each of you have some brief closing comments, we'll go ahead and start with Lauren.
So I would say that gender identity, sexual orientation, sex, relationship orientation are unique things. Everybody has one of each. Also, there are often stereotypes that these things are automatic, that if you have a bisexual identity, for example, you're polyamorous, but that's not true. Every person has a unique set of these different facets of our identities, as well as other facets, including having racial ethnic identities, people from different nationalities, and that's important to keep in mind when doing this work. And that the solution for one person may not be the same as another, but to keep in mind the use of bisexual as an umbrella term to try to call out the community and include us. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. And Gary?
I want to encourage ERG professionals and HR professionals and members of ERGs to be proactive. If you don't see enough bi people participating or being out, try to solicit and encourage in whatever way you can, having a meeting, having a whatever, to a focus day, because a lot of times people might be or self-identify internally, but they want to be out. And there's so much stigma still out there, even with the Supreme Court ruling and other things happening in society. It can be glacial. It's been, I think, Denise and I have been active in this community, and I was president of BiNet USA at one point myself, and we've been active in this for literally decades, and it's only now that it seems to be coming to the fore, but it's still glacial. So I encourage people to be proactive and help those people who are still in the closet be more comfortable and bring themselves to work, their whole selves to work.
Thank you, Gary. And Denise?
Yes, and I see a question coming in, so I just want to make this statement that, all of us are a little bit different, and that's what makes life so interesting. And if somebody's coming out as gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, or any other label, or just questioning that has nothing to do with how competent they are at their job and how trustworthy they are. And I hope that we can all strive to make our workplaces an inclusive and supportive and productive environment. Thank you.
And I'd like to thank all of our panelists, Lauren, Gary, and Denise, for your time today. And I'd also like to thank each and every one of you for joining us. A reminder that our Out and Equal Workplace Summit will be in Dallas, Texas, October 6th through 8th, with our Leadership Day on October 5th. For more information, you can visit us at outandequal.org and click on our summit link. And there will be a brief survey at the end of the call. We'd like to hear your feedback, and we'd also like to hear what other topics you would like us to feature. Our next monthly town call will be on Thursday, October 29th at 12 p.m. Pacific, and we will be doing our summit highlights from the 2015 Out and Equal Workplace Summit. If you have any questions regarding training, you can contact Pat Bailey, Director of Training, or myself, Daniel Lawrence Smith, Associate Director of Training, at the information below. Thank you all for joining us, and have a great day.